The high priest stood on a high stage, holding and loudly reading the accusation for Abella. No one supported the princess who committed such a serious crime. Lemuria looked with bitterness at her only sister, who was waiting for the guillotine. The sharp blade slowly rose up and then sharply rushed down. The entire scene turned into a sea of blood. A nurse comes into Dean's room and says it's time for the girl to get ready for surgery. The girl closes the unfinished book with a sigh. John hopes that after the operation, she will be able to read the last chapter. The nurse is embarrassed, but assures the girl that she will read more than one book. Something went wrong during the operation. John sees the fading light and realizes that she will never wake up. In a huge hall, the priests of the magical order call upon their forces. Magic flames surround a girl sitting in the center of the hall. With horror, the girl sees that the flame of the magic ball is gradually dying out. The high priest regretfully says that it is impossible to awaken magical abilities in a girl. A man in luxurious clothes sadly looks at the girl and realizes that he has no choice. The girl anticipates trouble and looks at the man with fear. Suddenly, black magical waves swirl around the girl. The baby is choking in the surrounding darkness. In hope, she reaches out her hand to the man who has turned away and falls into the abyss. Jin opens his eyes in horror and is relieved to realize that this is just a dream. The girl looks around in confusion, but cannot recognize her hospital room. Jean is perplexed and wonders how long the operation took and why the hospital did such a luxurious renovation. Suddenly, the girl notices her hands. They are so small and soft, not at all like the ones worn out by constant injections that she had before the operation. Jean, with great difficulty, gets off the unrealistically huge bed and runs to the mirror standing by the window. In the mirror, the girl sees a little girl with long blonde hair and huge, fiery-colored eyes. Jean falls to the floor in shock and watches the reflection, which for some reason repeats her every movement. The scream heard far beyond the room from which it came. Hearing the scream, 3 girls in maid uniforms run into the room and in panic ask what happened to Her Highness. One of the girls feels Jean and says with relief that Her Highness is okay. Jean, in desperation, grabs the maid and with tears in her eyes asks who she is. The maid, accustomed to the girl's whims, reveals that she is the only princess of the Reifenstrai Empire, Her Highness Princess Abella. Jean turns over the names and titles she heard in her mind. It all seems surprisingly familiar to her. Suddenly, she realizes that all this is from a half-read book called How to Raise a Princess. And then Jean gradually begins to understand what is happening. She did not wake up from the operation. She was reborn into Princess Abella. Jin sits dejectedly in a chair, trying to figure out how it all happened. For the 100th time, she repeats that she is Princess Reifenstrai. The maids nod in fear. After a while, Jean begins to believe that she has truly been reborn and is now Princess Abella. The girl remembers that according to the plot of the book, the girl was branded a worthless princess. In a world where respect directly depends on the level of magical powers, their absence is considered a shame and is condemned in every possible way. The lack of a magical gift deprived Abella of her rights to Presto, after which she became even more corrupt and tyrannical. All her life, Abella envied and hated the crown princess, her half-sister Lemuria. In the end, to win the power struggle, she prepared a whole cup of poison. The princess killed her father, ruining her own life with this act. Princess Abella was eventually executed. Jean screams in panic why she was reborn into this vile and worthless heroine. The girl turns to the maid. She shudders in fear. Jean does not understand why the maid is so afraid of her. Suddenly, the servants open the doors in reverence. A handsome man in luxurious clothes enters the room. All the servants fall to their knees. Jean realizes that this is Abella's father and tries to remember everything that was written about him in the book. Emperor Alwer is the youngest ruler of the Reifenstrai Empire, ascending to the throne at the age of 19. Having taken the oath to the empire, he immediately raised troops and set off to conquer neighboring empires. In just 10 years, he expanded the territory of Reifenstra several times. Under his rule, the empire achieved unprecedented prosperity. At the same time, The cruel and cold-blooded tyrant had the most beautiful face, like an angel. Looking sternly at the maid, the emperor asks what happened. The maid trembles with fear and answers. The princess suffered because of her carelessness. When asked by her father what the princess's bodyguard was doing at that time, the girl looks away and doesn't know what to say. Suddenly, the man's gaze becomes icy. He orders to answer. The maid trembles and says that a few days ago, Sir Victor angered the princess and is now still healing his wounds. Jean thinks with horror that in the book, Abella's character was simply devilish. The girl remembers the terrible pictures from the book in which the princess tormented her servants and understands why now all the servants are afraid of her. Suddenly, the emperor turns to his daughter. His gaze frightens the girl very much. She understands that now she will get it because of the behavior of the previous owner of the body. But unexpectedly, the father gently and affectionately strokes his daughter's head and asks what hurts her. In a rage, Altward turns to the lackeys and asks how some exile dares to provoke the princess, orders him to be brought immediately. Jin watches with interest and fear how quickly and often he changes his facial expression. The chief magician of the empire, summoned by her alarmed father, approaches the girl. The magician asks Jean to stay put as a stunning blue light begins to sparkle around him. Wonderful waves lift the girl into the air, and she realizes with shock that this is real magic. Jin experiences unusual sensations and gradually sinks back to the floor. The magician reports to the emperor that Her Majesty's health is no longer in danger. Altver nods with satisfaction and releases the magician. A caring father tells his daughter that he is very glad that everything is okay with her. Jin is perplexed because in the book, Altver is described as a cold-blooded tyrant. The guards appear with the prisoner and report that His Majesty's order has been carried out. The guards throw the prisoner to the floor. He trembles and tries to get up. Suddenly, the prisoner raises his head and looks straight at the princess, his gaze blazing with hatred. Jean does not understand why he is looking at her like that. The book says that Victor is a prince from the Silently Empire because he has black hair and red eyes. Everyone considered him an outsider. At the age of 10, Victor was transferred to Reifenstrai as a political hostage. At the age of 12, Victor was sent home because he offended the princess, after which no one saw him. This character appears in the book for only a few chapters, gradually moving into the background of everyone else. Jill is frightened by Victor's gaze and hides behind the emperor. Noticing this, the emperor becomes furious and says that the hostage sent from some tiny state does not dare look at his daughter. The emperor tells Victor that he has failed in his task as the princess's bodyguard, and for this, he will pay in blood. Suddenly, Altward decides with contempt that such a crime can only be washed away by the bloodshed by all the people of the Silently Empire. Jean is shocked. Such a small thing as a glance in her direction could lead to the collapse of an entire empire. Victor bowed his head obediently. He didn't even try to object. Everyone stood silently. No one tried to intercede for the young man. Everyone thought only of themselves. The girl does not understand what kind of world this is, where there is no justice and human rights. Instead of laws, everything is based on power. No one tries to contradict the despotic ruler. Jean understands that if Victor dies because of her, if a war breaks out, then she will become one of these soulless cowards. Suddenly, Jean comes out from behind her father and selflessly declares that Victor is not to blame for anything. She herself was not careful enough, and this has nothing to do with the young man. Victor is stunned. He does not understand why the princess decided to stand up for him. A month later, Jean fully accepted the fact of her rebirth. From now on, she is Princess Abella. The girl looks thoughtfully out the window and thinks that this rebirth is a true gift from God. From the moment of birth until her death, the girl spent most of her time in the hospital. By transforming into Abella, she received the body of a healthy person, which she had dreamed of all her life. A month has passed since the story with Victor. Abella still remembers with trembling how she dared to contradict the tyrant, but her father no longer remembered this situation. Suddenly, the princess notices that the bodyguard is looking at her thoughtfully. With a beaming smile, the girl asks if everything is okay. The young man, looking at her smile, thinks about what new punishment she is preparing for him. Abella is embarrassed, looking at the expression on Victor's face. And although she doesn't understand what's wrong, she clearly didn't mean it that way. In the short time spent in this world, the princess realized that the character of the heroine was no different from what was written in the book. Everyone was afraid of her. In the entire palace, there was almost no one willing to even just talk to her. Even her personal maid is afraid of her. The princess was so terrible. Abella decides that it's time to change her opinion about herself and should start with those closest to her. The princess approaches Victor, who is bending his knee, extends his hand, and offers to rise. The girl swears on the name of the imperial princess that she will never again hurt the young man or humiliate her. Victor looks at the princess and wonders what she was up to again in the end. The bodyguard stands up, ignoring the princess's outstretched hand. Suddenly, a voice is heard at the door that it is unacceptable to behave this way with Her Majesty. The young man who entered, the princess's personal butler Neil Tevi, respectfully greeted Her Highness. According to the book, Neil is the only person who remained on Abella's side from the beginning to the very end. While others gradually turned away from the girl, he was always there. Neil was so devoted to the princess that he sacrificed his life for her without regret. Neil hurriedly approaches the princess. He looks at Victor with disdain and obvious hostility. Between the man and the boy, it's like electric discharges jump. Abella wonders with surprise whether their relationship is really that terrible. Approaching the princess, Neil respectfully bends his knee. The butler reports that he returned from his trip empty-handed. Abella reads the documents brought by Neil. It turns out that His Majesty has an illegitimate daughter, her half-sister. The girl remembers that in the book, her sister, Lemuria Larwood, is the main character. According to the plot, the young emperor created an alliance with a girl from the family of a wealthy merchant, as a result of which a child was born. However, soon after the birth of Lemuria, a misfortune occurred in the merchant's family, and everyone ended up in prison. The young princess disappeared without a trace. The lost princess was sheltered and raised by a family of peasants. But it turned out to be impossible to erase the noble blood of the imperial family. After returning to the palace, Lemuria very quickly became the favorite of all its inhabitants. Even the cold-blooded and tyrannical emperor gave in. His cruelty, which frozen his heart like ice, melted from the warmth emanating from Lemuria. And there were no people who did not like the newly minted princess. Those who plot against the main character usually do not achieve what they want. Abella understands that the one who is usually the first to fall under the distribution was the mistress of the body in which she is now. Initially, the empire was supposed to have one princess. But due to the appearance of Lemuria, Abella fell out of favor. Lemuria was benevolent and gentle, while Abella was headstrong and cruel. The outcome of the plot is obvious. The prince and princess of Lemuria lived happily ever after. And the hypocritical villain Abella, rejected by everyone, died. In the original story, Abella's character was created only to compete with the main character and be jealous that Lemuria took all her father's love for herself. Abella decides that she just needs to stay away from the main character, then there won't be any problems. Neil, looking at his mistress, decides that she is very upset and worried about the presence of her sister. But suddenly, the princess, with an angelic expression on her face, asks when she will be able to see her sister. Neil is so taken aback by Abella's reaction, he expected a completely different reaction to his message. The butler leans over to the princess and asks if she is angry. Abella thinks to herself that it is impossible to be angry with the main character. She just wants to live her new life in peace. Neil is puzzled and thinks about the princess's words. Suddenly, it dawned on the man, and he says that he understood the subtext of the princess's words. Abella looks at Neil's expression and exclaims in horror that that's not what she meant at all. Suddenly, the butler says that they need to start acting as soon as possible. Otherwise, the consequences will not be long in coming. Victor and the maid are sadly silent. No one wants to say out loud what they are thinking. Abella can't understand why everyone has such strange faces. Finally, the princess loses patience and orders him to tell her everything. Victor begins to tell that Abella, as the daughter of the emperor, was entrusted with responsibility for the imperial family from birth. If Abella loses battles one after another, then she will face the same fate as Victor himself. The girl doesn't understand what we're talking about because Victor didn't do anything wrong. Victor says that from birth, he was not like everyone else. Because of the color of his hair and eyes, he was branded cursed. The title of heir was taken away, and he was expelled to another empire. Abella thinks with sadness that even a prince has to suffer because of absurd nonsense, and she will definitely become a disgrace to the empire because she cannot become anyone else without magic. Neil, seeing how upset the princess is, tries to calm her down and says that there is no need to worry. The butler angrily declares that he will never allow something like this to happen. The girl is dejectedly silent, immersed in her thoughts. Neil is holding back with all his strength so as not to kick out Victor, who dared to upset his favorite. Suddenly, the princess calmly and distantly says that she will prepare for this in advance. Looking out the window, Abella realizes that this must be a completely different preparation. Suddenly, the girl realizes that living in a healthy body is very difficult. She thought that enough times she would not need to be subject to constant restrictions. It would be enough to just lead a calm and measured life. But in this place, the law is not perfect, and one tiny mistake can cost your life, as if nothing depends on you. Abella suddenly seemed to wake up. She couldn't just admit defeat. Flipping through the books again and again, Abella thinks that others could easily be reborn as a princess and live without worrying about anything, but she managed to fall into the hands of an evil witch. The girl thinks that even if she cannot control the fate of her unfortunate heroine, she will never come to terms with such an ending. Abella must change her sad fate. The girl behaves very strangely. The servants begin to suspect that the poor princess has gone crazy. Abella holds an incredibly long list in her hands and announces that her rescue plan is ready. According to the plan, she will need to spend a lot of time studying the history of her country. She will need to become an exemplary princess. Once upon a time, the emperor himself hired a teacher for Abella, but at that time, the princess was still so small that now the girl must quickly catch up with all the gaps. However, in reality, the past Abella never taught anything at all. The girl thinks that she simply needs a teacher for additional classes, but cannot decide who to choose. The maid Heidi is not suitable. She is too soft, and besides, she is still afraid of Abella. Neil is very smart and has a lot to teach, but he has so many other responsibilities that he hardly finds time to study. Well, of course, only Victor remains. He certainly won't be able to refuse her. Endless classes began. Abella, although she was sometimes unbearably bored, diligently crammed everything. Finally, the strict Victor passed the exam brilliantly. The girl is incredibly happy that her plan is gradually beginning to come true. During all the time she studied with Victor, the princess almost caught up with the original level of knowledge of the former Abella, and in some places, she even surpassed it. But despite all the efforts of the little princess, Victor still treats her coldly and somewhat distantly. For etiquette lessons, Neil found the Duchess of Klein, famous for her elegance. The Duchess worked diligently with the girl, touching on all aspects of social life. Now, her knowledge of Abella etiquette is quite up to the required level. However, to be a princess, you need to learn many more things. Abella always thought that to be a princess, it was enough for her to be born and drink and eat on time. But in reality, everything turned out to be much more complicated. Neil and the maids enter the room with tea. It's time to take a break. The maids set a luxurious table with all kinds of sweets. Abella, like any little girl, loves sweets. But after a moment, delight gives way to sadness. In a past life, the girl, due to illness, could not eat everything. But when she entered the new world, she was denied nothing. And the consequences in the form of excess weight were not long in coming. From that moment on, Heidi declared a tough war on all sweets. The princess's stomach growls. She looks at the maid and begs to let her eat at least a piece. Heidi cannot resist this look from her ward and says that only today, as an exception, this table was prepared especially for Her Highness. The girl rushes to the maid, hugs her, and says that Heidi is the kindest person in the empire. Abella is delighted. Before, she never imagined that such little things could make her happy. While finishing her tea, the princess notices that Victor is looking thoughtfully out the window, immersed in some thoughts of his own. Abella also looks out the window and sees wonderful kites there. Suddenly, the princess looks at Victor and realizes that, in fact, he is still just a child and just wants to play and forget about all the difficulties of life. Suddenly, the girl claps her hands and says that she is tired, and now they are all going to the garden together. They will play and relax. Victor froze in amazement and did not fully believe the princess's words. Abella turns to Neil and, like a true lady, asks permission. Since the girl needs to change, Victor and Neil are waiting for her at the gate. These two obviously can't stand each other's company. They prefer to turn away and pretend that they are each on their own. Finally, the princess runs out of the castle. She is the very charm in a new dress and with a beaming face. Seeing the girl, Victor noticeably blushes. Neil, seeing Victor's reaction, becomes furious. The butler blocks the young man's back and reports to the princess that, on his instructions, the kites for the princess's game are ready. Abella glows with delight. She just wants to be a little girl. The tension between Neil and Victor is growing, as if electricity sparkles between them. The princess flies kites with delight. She has not felt so free and easy for a long time. All the servants are involved in the princess's game. Her snake turns out to be the highest. Suddenly, Abella notices that Victor's kite is rising higher and is ahead of the girl's kite. Seeing such impudence, Neil sharply twists the rope. His kite knocks down Victor's toy. With sarcasm, the butler remarks that if the young man is worse than others, then there is no point in trying to stand out. The men compete for the princess's attention in such a childish way, causing her to laugh cheerfully. Playing further, Abella thinks that the book Neil is cold and insensitive. But in fact, he turned out to be very nice, which means she herself has no right to be weak. Suddenly, the rope on Her Majesty's snake becomes taut and breaks. A strong wind carries the snake to the farthest corner of the garden, directly onto the roof of the gazebo. Abella takes off and runs for her toy. Having made her way through the hedge, the princess looks around, looking for the way to the gazebo. After getting lost a little, Abella runs out onto the lawn, surrounded by beautiful flowers. There is a gazebo right in the center of the lawn. Suddenly, the girl sees that she is not alone on the lawn. Someone is sitting in the center of the gazebo, quietly humming. The princess thinks that her father built this gazebo especially for her, and no one except her and her retinue has the right to come here. And this girl is not familiar to her, although her silhouette seems familiar to her. Suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, Abella is struck by the thought that this is Lemuria Larwood, her half-sister. The princess remembers that according to the plot of the book, they should meet for dinner in 6 months. But something went wrong. Abella decides that the best strategy is to quietly leave the area. But suddenly, she steps on a dry branch and a very loud crash is heard. Lemuria, hearing an extraneous sound, turns around in fear. Abella tries to run away before her sister notices her, but suddenly hears a greeting. Lemuria stands up, makes a deep curtsy, and greets Her Highness with respect. Abella, in a panic, cannot understand why her sister ended up here and right now. Seeing the strange expression on the princess's face, Lemuria politely asks if she is okay. Having coped with her emotions, Abella joyfully replies that everything is fine. She just doesn't understand how Lemuria got here. The older sister replies that while walking in the park, she noticed that there were the most beautiful flowers on this lawn. Lemuria really wanted to prepare a gift for the first meeting with Her Majesty, so she decided to collect a bouquet here. Abella understands with annoyance why everyone in the book loved her sister, and if she had not been the main character, they could have become friends. Suddenly, a man's voice is heard from the bushes. He says that the bouquet is beautiful and quite worthy of Her Majesty. Faithful Neil coldly tells Lemuria that this gazebo was built by His Majesty especially for the princess, so all outsiders are prohibited from being here. Victor, who appeared after Neil, rather menacingly asks what Lemuria's intentions were if she arbitrarily invaded the princess's possessions. The girl is very frightened, sincerely asks for forgiveness, admits that she did not know that this was the property of Her Highness. Lemuria says that His Highness allowed her to move freely around the garden, and she decided that she could come here too. Lemuria has not yet been officially introduced, so she cannot call the Emperor father. Abella remembers a story in which her sister grew up among peasants. She was subjected to various bullying, and the princess is surprised to realize that she feels very sorry for Lemuria. Suddenly, a familiar voice is heard asking Lemuria what she is doing here. The girls turn around in fright. The emperor himself appears in front of the gazebo, and contrary to usual, he looks quite simple. Heidi runs up to Abella and asks if the princess has found her kite. The girl answers with embarrassment that she was so surprised by the appearance of Lemuria that she completely forgot why she came here. The emperor looks at Lemuria, and his gaze instantly becomes cold and prickly as ice. The girl is scared. Without saying a word to his eldest daughter, he turns away and orders the guards to take Lemuria to her chambers. Taking Abella by the hand, Alvar heads towards the exit, casually telling Lemuria that from now on he forbids her to appear near the princess without his permission. As she leaves with her father, Abella feels awkward and shy, and she turns around sharply. Lemuria, with tears, sees her father and sister leave and remains completely alone at the gazebo. Abella is studying in her room, yawning from boredom and fatigue. The girl looks at the beautiful flowers in the vase. Lemuria does not give up hope of making friends. Almost immediately after meeting in the garden, she sent the princess this bouquet. A few days later, events begin to develop in accordance with the plot of the book. Abella receives an invitation to the ball. During a dinner party, the emperor must introduce Lemuria. To the cheers of those present, she will be presented as the daughter of the emperor. Abella will be shunned and studiously ignored by the entire society. Because of envy and resentment, she will have to become the one everyone hates. The girl thinks that despite the fact that they met a little earlier than necessary, this will not ruin her plans. The princess is sure that she must change her image in the eyes of other people for the sake of her own future. Only the item about dancing remains unfulfilled on her list. The girl goes out into the garden, looks around in search of someone from her retinue. Noticing Heidi, the princess runs up to her and asks if she has seen Neil. The maid replies that the butler has important business today, and he left without saying when he would return. The girl sadly says that she wanted to practice dancing with Neil before the upcoming ball, but obviously she will have to give up this idea. Heidi thoughtfully replies that if Her Highness wants to practice dancing, then she may well choose someone else to do it. Suddenly the maid turns around, calls Victor, and waves her hand to him. Victor feels a chill run down his spine. For some reason, he doesn't expect anything good. The other dance partner Heidi was talking about turned out to be Victor. Abella appreciated the maid's idea because Victor once belonged to the imperial family, which means he could very well teach her how to dance. The princess is a little embarrassed by the presence of the young man, but Victor boldly approaches and offers to start the lesson. The young man holds out his hands to the girl and, according to the rules of etiquette, says that he has the honor to invite her to dance. Having started to dance, the girl happily notices that dancing in this world is very similar to the waltz from her real world. Abella recalls that in her world, she danced the waltz very well, so even now she should not have problems with dancing. The girl notices that, in fact, Victor is not inferior in attractiveness to other male characters. Continuing to dance, the princess wonders why this young man was given only a couple of chapters in the book. The princess is so carried away by her thoughts that at some point she stumbles and begins to fall. At the last moment, Victor catches her. Abella continues her reasoning and steps on the young man's foot, embarrassed that Victor might notice her absent-mindedness. Suddenly, Neil enters the room and asks why Her Majesty didn't wait for her faithful butler to train. The girl answers without hesitation that Victor is also a very good teacher. Suddenly, the bodyguard lets go of Abella's hand, bows, and asks permission to leave since Mr. Neil has returned. As they pass the butler, the two exchange glances as if they are about to throw themselves at each other. The princess watches this scene in bewilderment, which no longer pleases her at all. And then the day of the ball comes, the carriages arrive at the castle one after another. The most noble people of the empire arrive one after another. Victor, in full dress uniform, stands thoughtfully at the door of Abella's chambers. Suddenly, images of a beautiful and happy princess flash through the young man's head. He remembers how they danced before the ball. Victor forcefully turns his head from side to side, trying to drive away the obsessive images. Meanwhile, Abella sleeps sweetly in her chambers and has no intention of waking up. Opening her eyes, she notices how great the weather is outside the window and decides that it is best to sleep under such sun. The door swings open and Neil enters, having learned from the maids that the princess has not even gotten up yet. The butler mercilessly wakes up the princess, looks at his watch, and notices that if they don't start getting ready right away, they risk being late. With a wave of his hand, Neil calls the maids and orders them to start getting ready. A trio of maids, led by Heidi, advance towards the bed, leaving Abella no chance of escape. Suddenly, the cry of the princess is heard throughout the surrounding area. She calls Victor and begs him to save her. The excited bodyguard rushes to the door to help his little mistress. Heidi blocks his way and explains with a smile that the princess is just a little capricious from fear of the upcoming event. Suddenly, Victor hears someone calling out to him behind him. Turning around, the young man and the maid can't believe their eyes. She definitely shouldn't be here. Before Victor and Heidi stands the beautiful and shining Lemuria, completely ready for the ball. The servants bow down and politely greet the princess's elder sister. Lemuria reports that she saw a familiar silhouette from afar, but did not expect that it was Victor who would be here. The girl presses herself close to Victor and gently asks why he is here, because Abella probably really needs him. The young man, in fright, jumps away from the girl at a considerable distance. Victor notes that if Lemuria passes here, it means she has some business. The girl begins to tell what her father told her, but then the footman abruptly interrupts her. The girl falls silent in embarrassment and suddenly says that she has to take her leave. Lemuria and the footman quickly turn around and leave. Victor and Heidi look after them in confusion. The girl confidently says that the eldest princess came here specifically for Victor. In the meantime, the princess's preparations are almost finished. All that remains is to tighten the corset a little, and the little lady will be ready. Heidi and Victor enter the room and look at Abella with delight. The little princess is simply magnificent. Every last detail in her appearance is carefully thought out. The girl looks like an angel. Heidi is proud of her work and the work of the maids. She exclaims with delight that Her Majesty is simply a goddess. Suddenly, Abella turns to Victor and asks if he likes her image. The young man is silent for a long time, blinded by the beauty of the princess. Then he comes to his senses and coolly replies that it is very beautiful. Abella, like a true princess, loves praise very much, so she turns to Neil and now asks his opinion. Neil looks at the princess carefully and says with satisfaction that it looks very similar and falls silent. Neil didn't want to say out loud, but now the little princess looks amazingly like her mother. The butler looks at his watch and decisively says that it is time for them to move out. Abella cannot be fooled so easily. She remembered that Neil interrupted himself mid-sentence and wondered what that meant. But now the most important thing is the ball. The girl will definitely figure out everything else later. Finally, the princess and her entire retinue leave the chambers and head towards the ballroom. At the entrance to the throne room, a footman announces that Duke Vado has arrived. A tall, handsome young man enters the hall and with a confident gait approaches the ladies standing nearby. The ladies greet the Duke and notice that they have not seen him in society for a long time. One of the ladies says that according to rumors, the princess, left outside the walls of the palace, has finally returned. The Duke is surprised by the news. he is not aware of recent events. The ladies say that immediately after returning, the princess was locked in the palace, and the youngest princess also did not appear in public all this time. The Duke is completely confused. He is completely unaware of events. A young girl with green eyes says that the youngest princess is so useless that she can't even stand up for herself. Covering herself with a fan from prying ears, the girl says that the real reason for the banquet is precisely the performance of the eldest princess. The Duke notes that perhaps the rumors are true, but perhaps not. Suddenly, the footman snaps to attention and announces that His Majesty and Her Highness have arrived. Everyone in the hall instantly fell silent, turned to the doors, and froze in anticipation. His Majesty Altford Larwood and Her Majesty Abella Larwood enter the hall. The little princess is completely unrecognizable. From a capricious, spoiled child, she gradually begins to turn into a beautiful lady. The entire community bows respectfully and salutes their great emperor and his daughter. Father and daughter slowly and proudly walk through the entire hall to the thrones installed on the pedestal. Suddenly, a hubbub begins behind the emperor's back. Young girls and boys whisper to each other, lively discussing what is happening. The emperor turns around sharply. He is angry at such impudence. He showers the gossipers with his famous icy gaze. All conversations immediately calm down. Abella looks at her father and thinks that this is why he is the ruler of the empire that dominates the mainland, because with just one glance, he is able to terrify anyone. Noticing that his daughter is nervous, he gently squeezes her hand and gently advises her not to pay any attention to them. Abella is flattered by his care and tenderness. The girl remembers that in the book, her father is described as a cold-blooded tyrant, but he was always very affectionate with her. Until his death, the father never hated his daughter. Walking hand in hand with her father, the girl thinks about why the bookish Abella did not spare her father, because he is so good. The emperor and the princess approach the pedestal on which the thrones stand, and then Abella notices that there are 3 of them. Sitting on his throne, Alvar announces that before the celebration begins, he wants to announce one event. The emperor points his hand to the girl standing to the side and announces that Princess Lemuria Larwood has returned to the palace. Presented to everyone, the princess immediately attracts all eyes. She is truly charming. The musicians started playing music and the gala evening began. As described in the book, Princess Lemuria immediately finds herself in the spotlight. Everyone wants to talk to her, and Princess Abella sits alone and longingly watches how quickly her sister charms everyone around. The girl was also not averse to going down to the hall and trying to make friends with someone, but she was ordered by her father to sit here and not communicate with these people. Princess Lemuria continues to captivate the community with lighthearted chatter and laughter all around her. The former Princess Abella firmly cemented her reputation as a willful, cruel, and capricious monster. Out of hopelessness and despair, the girl begins to tremble with chills. The sensitive father notices that Abella is upset and asks what happened. The girl, having pulled herself together, says with a joyful smile that everything is fine. Suddenly, a footman approaches the emperor and tells him some news in his ear. The ruler's face darkened with terrible anger caused by the news. The father approaches Abella, gently puts his hand on her head, and tells her that he will return soon, and she should wait for him here. As soon as the emperor has left, Abella jumps from the throne. This is the perfect chance to put her plan into action. Making her way through the hall, the girl looks around in search of suitable company. At this time, Lemuria notices empty thrones. Neither her father nor Abella is anywhere. The younger princess notices a small group of young girls, quite pleasant to look at, and rushes towards them. According to all the rules of etiquette, Abella politely wishes the girls good evening. But looking up, she notices that the girls have disappeared, so quickly that the girl didn't even notice it. Abella is lost. She finds herself in this world. It doesn't matter whether she is a princess or not. Since there is no magic, she will be treated like an infectious patient. The girl angrily thinks that it is not at all surprising that the former owner of the body has become such a villain. With gloomy determination, Abella decides that she doesn't care. If she can't make contacts, then it's time to move on to dancing. She urgently needs to find a partner. Suddenly, behind one of the columns, the girl notices a familiar face. Handsome Victor stands silently, not paying attention to anyone. Abella jumps for joy. Victor will be her dance partner because they danced so well with each other. Victor, noticing the princess out of the corner of his eye, turns sharply and quickly leaves. But the girl, with enviable persistence, catches up with him and calls out to him. The young man realizes with annoyance that he has been caught. Abella curtsies and invites Victor to dance. The girl is afraid that the guy will refuse her. She looks at him with such despair and pleading that the young man's heart trembles. Victor leans over to the princess, takes her hand, and says that it is a great honor for him. In the center of the hall, quite a lot of couples are spinning in a beautiful dance. The young couple takes their place in the center of the hall. The training was not in vain. Abella and Victor are so accustomed to each other that their dance resembles a beautiful flight. The dancing couples turn in surprise towards the dancing young people, and the gossips admit with surprise that they did not expect such beautiful movements from the princess. Abella and Victor are so dizzy that they don't notice anyone or anything around them. They're just enjoying the dance. Evil gossip tongues sarcastically note that the princess was frightened by the arrival of her older sister and decided to become a good girl. Not far from the heroes, Lemuria is dancing together with an unfamiliar young man. The same gossips notice that the eldest princess arrived not long ago, but her dancing skills are simply excellent. An unspoken rivalry begins between the two couples. Suddenly, Abella asks how Victor ended up here. The young man admits that he was sent here by Neil to guard the princess. The young man ironically recalls how Neil warned him not to let his hands go. Otherwise, this banquet would be the most terrible in his life. The princess admits to her guard that she is very pleased with his presence and that the implementation of his plan is going well. Suddenly, the girl notices Lemuria dancing not far from them. Abella begins to panic, comparing herself to her sister and saying that she needs to try harder. Victor wholeheartedly wants to reassure the princess and says that Her Highness should not compare herself with others. Suddenly, Victor shields Abella, and the girl feels someone crashing into him. In front of the amazed audience, the girl sees Lemuria sitting on the floor next to her. Victor hugs Abella and looks towards the eldest princess with cold indifference. Her dance partner runs up to Lemuria and asks if she hurt herself. Suddenly, Victor coldly says to Lemuria that Her Highness should be careful next time so as not to fall. Lemuria looks up at him with tears in her eyes and tries to justify herself. But the young man interrupts his older sister and declares that a little longer and Princess Abella could have suffered. A crowd of courtiers immediately begins to discuss the incident, wondering whether Lemuria did it on purpose or Abella. Suddenly, Abella breaks away from Victor's arms, runs up to Lemuria, extends her hand to help her get up, and gently asks if everything is okay with her sister. But unexpectedly, Lemuria's partner rudely pushes Abella's hand away. The young man boldly advises Abella not to pretend, because if she had not moved away, Princess Lemuria would not have fallen. Victor runs up and covers Abella with himself. The young men stand opposite each other, and things are clearly heading towards a fight. Suddenly, the angry voice of the emperor is heard, asking what happened. Victor bends his knee and says that during the dance, Princess Lemuria almost hit Her Highness Abella when she fell. The eldest princess's saucy partner interjects and says that it was, in fact, the princess who nearly hit Her Highness Lemuria while dancing. The emperor looks coldly at his eldest daughter and asks if this is so. Lemuria, in a submissive and gentle voice, tremblingly admits that she was the one who was careless. The younger sister had nothing to do with it. Abella watches the emperors in amazement. She did not expect that her older sister would turn out to be such a suck-up and would do everything to make her father believe her. Contrary to the fears of the youngest daughter, Alvar looks at the eldest with disappointment and says that if she doesn't know how to dance, then she shouldn't dance at all. Suddenly, the emperor turns towards Victor and says that this is the second time he has failed to protect the princess. Altver motions to the servant to give orders regarding Victor's fate. But then a frightened Abella runs up to her father. The girl passionately convinces her father that if Victor had not shielded her in time, she would have suffered too. To protect her guard, the girl is ready to do anything, even pretend to panic and look pleadingly at her father. Abella looks so touchingly, trembling inside with fear that her idea of being a good girl will fail ingloriously. The father's heart trembles. He takes Abella in his arms, ordering the others to continue the banquet. Duke Veto, standing a little to the side, thoughtfully watches this whole scene. Having brought Abella to rest, her father gently strokes her cheek and carefully asks if everything is all right with her. The emperor thoughtfully tells his daughter that next time, if she doesn't feel like going to such an event, she doesn't have to go. Abella is delighted that her father is the man who is truly ready to protect her from any adversity. The princess and the emperor drink tea cheerfully and casually, enjoying communication with each other. There is a knock on the door. The footman reports that Duke Veto asks for an audience. Suddenly, the emperor's expression changes, and he looks at the door with hostility. The father turns to the princess and asks if she wants to let the duke in. Abella recalls that according to the plot of the book, Duke Veto emerged as the main winner, and it was thanks to him that Lemuria and her lover ascended the throne. The girl thinks that the duke clearly has some plans. She wouldn't want to meet him now. The princess looks piercingly at her father, hinting that she does not want to interrupt such a wonderful evening that they are spending together. The emperor tells the footman that the princess is not feeling very well. She needs peace. There will be no audience today. Let the duke return to his place. The duke stands outside the door with Lemuria. They heard the emperor's entire conversation. The man replies that in that case, they will come another time. Lemuria drooped. She so wanted to spend at least a little time in her father's company. A few days later, Abella learns that her father ordered a tea party because he learned that the princess liked socializing with other girls. The girl is confused. So as not to upset her father, she told him that she has no problems in communication, and now she will have to accept everyone who is afraid of her and does not love her. The girl is not discouraged. She decided that this is another chance to try to establish communication and a chance to change public opinion about her. Finding herself in a noisy and bright market, the princess feels unusually inspired because she practically never leaves the castle. The girl is a little ashamed that she came up with an excuse to buy gifts for the tea party. Otherwise, her father would not have let her go to the city. Initially, the father himself wanted to accompany his daughter, but a suddenly arriving visitor disrupted his plans. Alwer tells the princess that he will not be able to go with her, but Neil and Victor will accompany her. While walking through the market, Neil invites the princess to look at the precious stones. The princess is amazed by the beauty of the decorations and says that they are perfect for a party gift. Neil tells the seller to pack all the goods. The princess is indignant. She did not want to buy everything at once. Why buy all the jewelry when you can choose one at a time? Suddenly, Victor's voice is heard from behind, who also orders all the goods to be packed. Immediately, all the sellers, having noticed profitable buyers, began vying with each other to invite them into their shops and offer goods. Neil tells the princess not to worry. He has agreed with the sellers. All purchases will be immediately sent to the palace. Victor immediately comes up and says that he has also resolved this issue. Neil and Victor again begin to compete and heat up the situation. The princess is on the verge of an explosion. Suddenly, Abella loudly screams that she's had enough. This is not how she wanted to choose gifts. Without allowing her companions to come to their senses, she takes off from her place and runs wherever her eyes look. After a while, the out-of-breath princess stops to catch her breath, realizing that she was able to break away from Neil and Victor. Suddenly, someone hands her a handkerchief to wipe away the sweat and carefully asks how she is. Abella looks up and sees a young man in front of her in strange but beautiful clothes. A stunningly handsome young man stands in front of the princess and continues to hand her a scarf. The girl has her head in the clouds, looks at the boy's face, and cannot concentrate on what he is saying. She looks at the young man, cannot take her eyes off him, and thinks about how stunningly handsome he is. Abella remembers Victor, her father, Neil. They are certainly handsome, but this young man is not like them. A piercing thought comes to the girl's head. He must be the angel everyone is talking about. Finally, the princess came to her senses, took the handkerchief, and replied that she was fine. Abella looks thoughtfully at the stranger and tries to understand who he reminds her of. Suddenly, it dawns on the girl that the young man is very similar to the priest from the book. The princess was dumbfounded. Could it really be him? Abella politely thanks the stranger for the scarf, promises to wash it and return it to the owner. The young man points his hand towards one of the houses and says that he lives here and the girl can find him at any time. Abella looks towards the house that the guy is pointing at and notices a sign above the entrance that says that there is a room for fortune-telling. The girl is amazed that the young man is really engaged in fortune-telling and prediction. The young man explains that he actually studies astrology. In addition, he observes the location of the stars and, of course, knows how to guess a little. The young man sees that the girl is interested and offers to come in and try to tell fortunes. Abella and the stranger enter a dark room filled with very strange objects. The young man says that he works here alone, so no one will disturb them. The young man takes out a beautiful iridescent magic ball and notices that the girl never said her name. The girl decided not to say that she was an imperial princess. She simply said that her name was Abella. The stranger begins to move his hands over the ball, which instantly begins to glow and rotate. The princess watches the mystery with excitement. Suddenly, the magic ball blinds with an incredibly bright glow. A loud crack is heard, and the ball breaks into pieces. The girl, frightened, asks the stranger what this means. Looking at the fragments, the princess thinks that apparently her predecessor did something so terrible that the crystal ball could not stand it and broke into pieces. The young man thoughtfully examines the bursting magic ball. Suddenly, a stranger approaches Abella and cheerfully says that she is very interesting. The girl is perplexed. Such frightening things are happening, and the guy says that she is interesting. What could this mean? The stranger explains that the crystal ball broke because someone imposed a ban, and he cannot tell her fortune. To the princess's perplexed questions, the guy replies that he doesn't know who could have imposed such a ban, but perhaps it was created to protect her. The girl is upset. She just wanted to tell fortunes for fun and didn't even realize that everything would go so wrong and she would find out about the strange ban imposed on her. Suddenly, the young man suddenly approaches the princess, looking at her intently. The stranger mysteriously reports that the ban imposed on her looks very familiar. The young man reaches out his hand to the girl's face. Abella gets very scared and calls for help. At this moment, Victor bursts into the room and, in a voice cold with rage, orders the stranger to take his dirty hands off the girl. The girl runs up to her guard with joy and relief. She is very happy to see him. Victor asks Abella for forgiveness for once again failing to protect her. The princess interrupts the young man, convinces him that he is not to blame for anything. She herself succumbed to emotions and therefore ran away. On the one hand, the girl is ashamed of her escape. But on the other hand, if she had not escaped, she would not have known anything about the mysterious ban. Victor covers Abella with himself and angrily asks who this man in front of them is. The stranger explains that he is an ordinary astrologer who sometimes tells fortunes, and they are in his house, so the young man should behave less aggressively. After everything that happened, the princess thinks that it is hardly possible to call the stranger an ordinary astrologer. Victor bows respectfully, asks for forgiveness for the intrusion, thanks for taking care of his lady. The stranger sincerely regrets that he frightened the little lady with some of his actions. As a sign of his sincere apology, the young man hands the girl a box with a gift for her. The box contains a wonderful necklace. Abella resolutely pushes away the box with the necklace and says that there is no need for this. The young people turn around and leave the strange house. The stranger mysteriously looks after them and notices that Abella refused the gift in vain. It will be very useful to her. Walking out onto a noisy street, Victor suddenly falls to his knees, says that he has made an unforgivable mistake, and asks the princess to punish him. Abella assures him that he is not to blame for anything, and if he had not come on time, there is no telling how everything could have ended. The princess realizes that now she can't think about anything except this strange meeting. She tries to understand what the stranger meant when he said that this magic was familiar to him. Neil runs up out of breath and bombards the girl with questions about whether everything is okay with her and where she has been. Abella is very ashamed. Without thinking about the consequences, she made the people most devoted to her worry so much. Neil says that there are enough adventures and experiences for today. It's time to return to the palace. The princess embarrassedly says that since all the gifts have been bought, we can return home. Abella turns towards the astrologer's house and is surprised to think that she feels disappointed in not receiving answers to her questions. The girl is very tired during the day, and having finished all the preparations for tomorrow's tea party, goes to bed. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, a strange glowing silhouette appears above Abella's bed. The girl wakes up and sees in front of her what appears to be the ghost of a young woman. The woman is incredibly beautiful and looks closely at the princess. Suddenly, the spirit reaches out its hand to Abella. The girl gets scared, jumps back sharply, and falls off the bed. Rubbing her bruised head, the princess tries to understand who this woman is and how she got into her room. The woman with the deep seal looks at Abella, realizing that she did not recognize her. Suddenly, the spirit gently touches the girl's cheek with her hand. Suddenly, the woman begins to move away. Abella feels some inexplicable sadness and reaches out to the woman. The girl tries to reach the spirit, asks her to wait, but the woman gradually disappears. Suddenly, the door opens slightly, and Neil enters the princess's chambers. The butler says that he heard a voice when he walked past Her Highness's door and decided to go in to find out why the princess was still awake. Seeing that the princess is frightened by something, Neil says that he will stand guard at the princess's door until the morning in case she needs him. In the morning, the princess can't wake up. Heidi asks why the girl didn't go to bed earlier before the important event. Abella replies that she just couldn't fall asleep for a long time. The girl turns to Neil and is perplexed because he too did not sleep all night, guarding the princess, but he is full of strength and energy. One of the maids comes into the chambers and announces that everything is ready for tea and we can begin. At the tea party, everything does not go according to plan. The princess sits alone, and the girls who came at the opposite end of the table surround Lemuria. Abella is upset and thinks that everything done at the ball had no effect. Suddenly, a chair moves out next to Abella, and an unfamiliar girl asks permission to take this place. The princess happily invites the girl to sit down. At the other end of the table, everyone suddenly becomes silent and looks in Abella's direction. The princess asks her interlocutor in a whisper why she doesn't avoid her. To the surprise of the girl, the princess replies that she has a very bad reputation for being capricious, but in reality, she is not like that. Abella sadly says that, among other things, she is completely devoid of magical powers. The girl sincerely looks at the princess and says that for her personally, this does not matter at all. The girls spend their time having a pleasant conversation with sincere sympathy and friendliness. Suddenly, Lemuria claps her hands and says that since the last guest has arrived, the tea party can begin. Abella is perplexed. Since this is her tea party, while Lemuria is acting as if she is the hostess of the event, the princess does not intend to let her get away with this. Abella motions to Heidi and tells her to start handing out the gifts. Maids approach the table, carrying elegantly packaged boxes of gifts in their hands. The girls look at the princess in bewilderment. She explains that these are gifts that were prepared especially for tea drinking. The girls look at each other, no one touches the boxes, an awkward pause hangs over the table. Abella fears that if the girls do not accept her gifts, it will be a complete failure. Suddenly, her interlocutor begins to shake the box with interest, wondering what's inside. Abella explains that since Blair is the daughter of General Aztec and has been trained in martial arts since childhood, this whip would be an excellent gift for her. The girls at the other end of the table start laughing at such a gift and say that the princess has no manners at all. Blair proudly reports that she really likes this gift and sincerely thanks the princess. The other girls, casting aside doubts, begin to open the boxes with curiosity and understand with delight how Abella pleased each of them. The princess is glad that her idea was a success. Her efforts to study each guest were not in vain. Lemuria is in no hurry to participate in the general holiday of gifts. She never opened her box. To avoid appearing rude, the older sister communicates her belief that her dear sister's gift is certainly wonderful. One of the girls enthusiastically clutches to her chest a book that she has long dreamed of, but could not get it anywhere. Abella observes the girls and notes that when they stop acting arrogant, they are quite nice and elegant. The princess is proud of herself. She did a great job and still managed to reduce her suspicions. Suddenly, one of the girls turns awkwardly, touches a mug of tea, and it tips over onto the tablecloth. Abella calls Heidi and asks her to check if everything is okay with Lady Wilfried. Miss Wilfried is scared and upset and apologizes for almost ruining the tea party. Abella laughs and replies that this is complete nonsense. The main thing is that the girl herself was not harmed. Suddenly, Miss Wilfried asks if Her Highness has read the book given to her. Abella is embarrassed, but admits that she has not read this book yet. Suddenly, Blair interrupts the other guest and says that it is not proper to ask such questions. Her Highness is only 12 years old, and her education is just beginning. Another guest chimes in, agreeing that this book is indeed very difficult to study. Abella beams. For the first time, someone outside her retinue comes to her side and to her defense. Miss Wilfried apologizes for her impudence. Abella assures her that everything is fine, and it really won't hurt her to study more. Suddenly, the guest declares with delight that Her Majesty is actually very sweet. The princess simply glows with delight. The guests, vying with each other, begin to brag about their successes. One of them proudly reports that her younger sister has already studied books whose names Abella has not even heard of. The princess thinks that all this time she has been intensively studying etiquette and has completely abandoned the books that the girls are now talking about with such delight. Abella is afraid that if she admits that she hasn't read these books, it will be tantamount to accepting the title of a useless princess. But if she lies and it comes out, her entire reputation will go down the drain. Suddenly, Lemuria says that her little sister has long and successfully studied all these books. Abella is perplexed, since when did the main character come to her defense? Lemuria, meanwhile, continues that the princess's teacher praised Her Highness as the most diligent student. One of the girls asks what progress Lemuria herself has made in studying such complex material. The eldest princess answers with embarrassment that, unfortunately, she is not as smart as Abella, but she is also trying to keep up. A few days after the tea party, Abella takes up her studies with triple zeal. She regrets that she has been focusing on dancing and etiquette and has completely forgotten that being a princess is about more than just having manners and looks. The princess realizes with shame that Lemuria, being outside the palace, knows how to support any topic and carry on a conversation, but she can only watch from the side. Abella asks Neil to bring her all the higher-level materials, the more the better. Neil fears that such materials will be too difficult for Her Highness, but Abella passionately declares that she must become the perfect princess. The girl thoughtfully reflects that only by learning everything a princess should know and getting rid of the stigma of being worthless will she officially become a princess worthy of this empire. Abella is determined to take fate into her own hands. Neil calls the princess, sitting under a tree with another book in her hands, and says that it's time for her to go. In the 2 years since the recent events, Princess Abella has grown from a charming little girl into a beautiful young lady. At the ball dedicated to Abella's 14th birthday, the invited girls discuss that recently the princess has been so busy with her studies that no one has seen her for a long time. At the entrance, a footman announces that the imperial family is arriving. His Majesty Altford Larwood, Her Majesty Abella Larwood, Her Majesty Lemuria Larwood have arrived. The emperor announces that the ball is dedicated to the princess's birthday and announces the beginning of the celebration. The father approaches his daughter and carefully wishes her to have fun. Lemuria bows in respect to her father and says that she will take care of her sister. Abella is surrounded by attention. All the young people of the society are eager to greet the princess and report on the gifts sent. The girl enjoys an abundance of attention and compliments because she has spent so long and diligently gaining her reputation. The elder sister approaches the princess and says that the orchestra is about to start playing, and Abella promised her the first dance. Music begins to play, and two beautiful girls begin to dance. Duke Veto watches the girls very thoughtfully and mysteriously. While dancing, Abella notices that there are at least 6 people at the ball who want to dance with her. The girls happily discuss that by deciding to dance with each other, they cleverly got rid of annoying fans. After Lemuria helped Abella avoid embarrassment at the tea party, the girls became very close. The eldest princess turned out to be much smarter than she wanted to seem and gladly helped her sister with her studies. The dance is over. The princesses bow to each other with pleasure. Suddenly, Duke Veto approaches the girls, greets the princesses, and introduces himself. Abella remembers the plot of the book. Duke Veto is the emperor's younger brother. Gentle, elegant, and polite, he helped the main characters of the book more than once. The duke saw how Abella tried to poison the emperor and immediately sent her to the guillotine. Noticing how Abella flinched, her uncle politely asked if everything was okay with her. Suddenly, Abella remembers that, among other things, it was the duke who returned Lemuria to the palace. The eldest princess thanks the duke for the book he sent her, but fears that it will be too difficult for her. Veto replies that the princess underestimates her intelligence. There's just no need to rush, and she'll figure everything out. The duke and Lemuria are having a carefree conversation, and it seems to Abella that they are speaking as if in a peculiar language, accessible only to them. The duke bows, wishes the youngest princess a good birthday, and says that he no longer wants to distract the princesses. Turning around, the uncle tells Abella that his gift has already been delivered to Her Highness's room and hopes that the princess will appreciate it. In the dead of night, Abella falls exhausted onto her bed. Finally, this long day is over. Neil comes in and says that the gifts for the princess are not yet unpacked. Abella asks the butler to call Victor and Heidi to help her unpack the boxes. The girl and her assistants open the gifts and, checking the list, see who they came from. From one of their boxes, Abella takes out a large, shining stone. Victor says that this stone belongs to the temple and is called the Holy Stone. Neil is surprised to announce that the gift was received from Duke Veto. The girl looks at the stone in amazement and wonders what the Duke wanted to say by giving it to her. Neil says that when the Duke brought Lemuria to the castle, the Emperor wanted to reward him, but his brother asked for the Holy Stone, but did not think that His Majesty would give it up so easily. Abella asks Heidi to put the stone in the drawer. She will deal with all this later. In the morning, the princess sits down to write grateful responses to the gifts received. Suddenly, Abella notices an unusual glow emanating from her desk drawer. The girl opens the box and sees that the Holy Stone, donated by the Duke, shines and shimmers. Immediately, as if in response to the call of the stone, something begins to shine on the shelf behind the books. The princess goes to the closet, pulls out books, and sees a strange depression in the wall, exactly the size of a stone. Obeying some vague instinct, Abella inserts the stone into the niche. Clicking slightly, it fits perfectly into place. The stone begins to shine brighter. The light blinds the princess. She hears a strange noise and feels the floor begin to tremble under her feet. Opening her eyes, the girl sees that instead of a solid wall, a passage has opened, and steps leading down are visible. Without listening to the voice of reason, the girl begins to go down the secret passage. Going downstairs, Abella sees large carved doors in front of her. The girl approaches the door, runs her hand over the intricate design carved on the wood, and realizes that this place seems strangely familiar to her. Somewhere she has already seen it before. Suddenly, the doors begin to open, and a bright light falls on the girl. Abella enters a strange room, most of which is occupied by books. On the table, she picks up one publication and is surprised to notice that this book is related to the study of holy power. According to the book, most people in this world are born with either magic or holy power, which is much weaker and much rarer. Due to their origins, royals usually have extremely powerful magical abilities. But among common people, there are also people with magical or holy powers. Those who have magical abilities are called magicians and warriors. Those imbued with holy powers must undergo training and testing to become servants of the temple. The girl looks up from the book and thinks that most of the texts here relate to religious studies, so this place may be connected with the temple. Suddenly, Abella notices a large gemstone on the table in a special stand. The princess, enchanted, takes the stone in her hands, and suddenly it begins to light up with a magical light. Suddenly, the spirit of the woman she already saw 2 years ago appears from the stone. The woman calls the princess by name. Abella is suddenly struck by a realization that this is not just a spirit, this is the spirit of her mother. The woman affectionately strokes the princess's face and congratulates her on her upcoming birthday. The girl tries to touch her mother, but the spirit that appears is incorporeal. The spirit asks the princess not to be sad. She regrets that she personally could not watch the princess grow up. The mother says that the girl had to find this place after she turned 14 years old. The woman gestures around the room and notices that Abella must have had a lot of questions, and it's time to get answers to them. Before going to bed, Heidi combs the princess's hair and notices how quiet and thoughtful she is. The maid asks you to tell her what is upsetting the princess. She will do everything possible to ease the burden. Abella replies that she is just tired, so Heidi puts her to bed and wishes her pleasant dreams. As soon as the door closed behind the maid, the girl takes out from under the bed a book she received from her mother and a lantern. This is not an ordinary book, but a diary. Abella begins to read impatiently. Saint Natalia was a servant of the temple, waiting for Abella. Even then, she felt her incredible magical power and vague traces of holy power. Looking into the future, Natalia realized that she would not be able to be with her daughter. She saw that the girl would become the only owner of 2 powers in the world. The woman knew that this power would bring many dangers to the princess, so she left the books and treasures in the secret room. On her 14th birthday, the girl had to find and open this door. And now, following her mother's promptings, the girl must master her power and protect herself. Her mother told Abella that she sealed her powers to protect her. It's not that Abella doesn't have magical powers, but that they were sealed. The girl remembers the mysterious astrologer. He told her the same thing. The girl cannot believe what is happening. Instead of having no strength, she has 2 at once. Abella goes to bed, deciding that there is a time for everything. In the holy temple, a priest stands in front of the statue of the supreme goddess. The envoy approaching from behind kneels. The priest pronounces only one order: not to disappoint the master. A mysterious stranger who practices astrology says he will do whatever is necessary. Abella spent the days that had passed since meeting her mother searching for a way to remove the seal from herself, but her search was unsuccessful. At breakfast, the princess looks upset. The emperor carefully asks what happened to her. Abella is not yet going to let anyone in on her secrets, so she cheerfully tells her father that everything is fine. She just didn't sleep well last night. After finishing breakfast, the father announces that tomorrow his daughters are going to the Imperial Academy. Abella is surprised how quickly and imperceptibly time flies. Turning to Lemuria, the emperor announces that she, as the eldest daughter, must take care of her younger sister. The girl assures that everything will be fine. Patting Abella on the head, her father says that she should rest a little and then ask Neil to help her pack her things. Sitting on the bed, Abella watches as Neil and Heidi, horrified that their pet is leaving the castle, go crazy packing her suitcases. The girl tries to protest that she has no use for so many things, but the faithful servants do not pay the slightest attention to her. They must do everything so that their mistress does not need anything. Abella turns to Victor and asks hopefully if he will accompany her to the academy as a bodyguard. Bowing respectfully, Victor replies that His Majesty ordered him to ensure the safety of the princess. The girl looks around in surprise and asks where his luggage is. The young man proudly takes the sword out of its sheath and says that this is the only thing he needs. Abella recounts her suitcases in confusion, and before Neil and Heidi come up with something else, she says that it's time to take care of Victor's luggage. Victor is puzzled. The princess has again cleverly outwitted him. Neil, as always, arrogantly and contemptuously remarks that Her Highness should not bother herself with such trifles. Abella happily replies that she is a princess and it is her responsibility to take care of her surroundings. In the morning, everyone gathers in the hall. Abella doesn't understand why they still haven't set off on their journey. Lemuria explains that the temple has decided to bless the princess's journey, so everyone is standing and waiting for them. A footman at the entrance announces that temple envoys have arrived. Young men in luxurious flowing cloaks enter the room. The envoys bow and greet the descendants of the sun to the glory of the empire. The entire imperial family, including the ruler himself, bows their heads respectfully before the envoys. The leader of the messengers, Bishop Winston, says that a long time has passed since he last saw the princesses. Abella looks thoughtfully at the bishop. He notes with a laugh that the last time he saw the princess, she was just a baby. She must not remember him. The princess sarcastically thinks that she only saw him once when she was reborn, so it is not surprising that she does not recognize him. The emperor coldly orders the bishop to hurry up and begin. Winston turns to one of the messengers and accepts his staff. Approaching Abella, the bishop asks her to close her eyes. Abella obeys, and Winston begins his ritual. To the sound of incantations, the wand projects magical symbols. Suddenly, the princess experiences strange sensations, as if her body is splitting into two. Winston notices that the princess is scared and asks her what happened. Abella tries to convince everyone that she is fine. She feels fine. The father is alarmed. The bishop explains that perhaps the princess's body, deprived of magic, could not resist the holy power, so the girl felt unwell. Bishop Winston bows before the princess and asks for forgiveness for being too careless. Suddenly, the emperor's face changes, and in an icy tone, he asks, since when did the temple become so bold? Instantly, the envoys, hearing the emperor's tone, covered the bishop with themselves. Abella turns to her father, assuring her that everything is fine with her and there is no need to worry. But for some reason, this time, she fails to calm her father down.